Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All the way back there? No. Okay, so you have to speak loudly and clearly to be heard in the back. That was useful. Hi, everybody. My name is Tricia Ratliff. I'm one of the 4 organizers of our microservices, DC Microservices meetup. I need both?
Yes.
Is that true? Was he kidding? Oh, he's joking.
That's for the room.
Oh, okay, to pass around. All right, so first of all, welcome. It's so good to see a large group here. I think we have about twice as many people as we had last time. So thanks for coming over here. I'm glad that you made it. I have a couple of introductions. First is Chris from Concur to my right. He's going to tell you a little bit about Concur, and then I'm going to come back and ask all of you. I know some people are here to find a new coworker, either someone to come work with you, or maybe you're looking for a coworker to go work with. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. But Chris, can you tell us a little bit about Concur?
Thank you. So it's the second time we are hosting this meetup here at Concur's location. We are in travel and expense business. I hope that everybody have used Concur before. If not, ask your managers, owners to buy. Why we are hosting it here? Because we are building a lot of microservices ourselves, and we are always looking for good talent. So it's an opportunity for us to meet with many people doing the same things, share ideas. I'm glad that we are able to host it here, and thank you for coming here.
Thanks, Chris. Can you guys thank Chris for hosting us? He's the reason that we have a space. And then, of course, as I mentioned, next on our agenda is anybody here looking for a coworker? Go ahead and raise your hand. All right. Can you pass the mic back? Go ahead and stand up and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Brian Bodwin. I work for Red Hat. We're always looking for coworkers. In fact, SG2 is a recruiting firm. I believe they're hiring for us, so please talk to them.
Okay, and on that note, I'd like to hand the mic over to Lacey. Lacey, go ahead and get the mic, or if you want to come up here. Lacey is from SG2, and I'll let her tell you about herself.
Thanks, Trish. Hi, I'm Lacey. I'm with SG2 Recruiting. As this gentleman so illustriously mentioned, perfect intro, we are one of the exclusive recruiting companies hiring for Red Hat currently in the DC metro area, predominantly DevOps engineers. We also have another position over here. We're hiring for Decipher, so please feel free to grab either job description, take a brochure, take an octopus, what have you. But thank you again. Feel free to enjoy all the pizza and all the drinks because it's less we have to drag home this evening. Thank you.
And thank you, Thank you, Lacey, for providing food.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, anybody else looking for a coworker? Wow, a couple more. Okay, pass this back.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Edgar Castilla from Sound Exchange. It's a music royalty company in DC. Not here in any official capacity, but we are hiring several full-stack developers. So if anybody wants to, speak to me afterwards, there's some cool stuff we're doing. I could talk about it in person. But.
Thank you. And go ahead and keep passing. Oh, are you looking for a coworker? Wayne had his hand up as well.
Hey, I'm Wayne with EPON Technologies. We have an office in DC. I run the DC, Richmond, and Charlotte offices. Our focus is on Java. We're strictly an open source shop, big data and cloud. The bulk of our projects right now are in mainframe migrations to microservices environment. We're always hiring mid, senior, junior, full stack Java engineers. So if we're a consultancy, so we have multiple projects going on with multiple customers at a time. So come talk to us. I got Raphael and Richard to come talk to. So
thanks, Wayne.
Hello, David Hodge. I'm a contractor with CBP, Customs Border Protection. We're looking for Java developers. We're just starting off with microservices on the AWS stack. Mostly employees for Unisys they're looking for, but contractors are welcome. Both junior and senior Java developers.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? Looking for a coworker? Okay, then we'll just let David keep the mic. I'm just kidding, whenever you have a question. All right, so without further ado, Phil Ruff is here to talk to us tonight about delivering microservices. Here's Phil Ruff from Scaled Markets.
Is anyone looking to make a change, as in you're looking for new coworkers, as in looking for a job? I'm not sure. If you are, stand up and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a job." Obviously there are a number of people in the audience that are looking for you. So we'll wait until the camera is off.
That's a good idea, actually. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Phil Ruff. I'm from Scaled Markets. I think, am I on that thing now? And of course, the screen went blank as soon as I did that. I'm talking tonight. I've been doing Agile since before it was called Agile. I've been doing DevOps since before it was called DevOps. And I've been doing microservices since, I don't know, whenever someone decides what the definition of a microservice, just like DevOps and things like that. Maybe before then, I don't know. So I'm much more about the delivery of, and focus on the delivery of these things. And so that's what my focus has been on, and that's what this talk is. And one of the things, as I've gotten into the microservices, what I've realized is the majority of what we're talking about here is actually more about the ecosystem. We had an earlier conversation with that was talking about saying here is the challenges in, actually made that little list on the left saying what do you actually need on a workstation to create, to do some microservices development. And so we pulled our resources and said, oh, this is what it is. And so at the end of this presentation, I'll share the GitHub repo that this is all built out of. And I'll be I didn't actually do this for the presentation because I've been running hard to get this presentation in the condition it's in. But I'll put together, say, this is a script that will actually set up your environment to support development of microservices, just as one of those side things. But that's my intent. My intent is to say, great, here we have, we're talking about how do we deliver microservices, but it's really saying how do we deliver microservices. And so I want your contributions into this presentation as much as I'm going to basically set a structure and say these are what we're going to talk about, but I welcome all input from the various environments that you come from. Hopefully that made enough sense. Anyway, all right. So what I'm going to take a look at is I'm going to talk about the pipeline initially. I'm going to look at the ecosystem, and we're going to talk about microservices. Talk about the microservices that are here that I'm running, and that's I think the most important part actually is once we see that I think there are 3 microservices that make this little. Actually, how many people are Java app developers? Okay, good. How many people remember the pet store application? Great. So this is the pet clinic application we're going to be running. It's actually, most of the services are lifted right out of Spring Pet Clinic, and there's someone who's done a microservices migration, and so I added some stuff to that to show you what we can do with it. And all this is running, we were having this conversation earlier, all this is actually currently running, and I'm doing this because I wasn't sure what the network is on this Mac, and so you'll see it all running on the Mac. And then we'll talk about the pipeline and getting out to using the exact same documents, the stuff in the Git repo to AWS and ECS. Okay. Okay. Nice slide deck, right? So most pipelines look something like this, or have these components. And this is a really rudimentary pipeline, right? We have version control. That's everything is in version control, and I mean everything, right? Otherwise, you can't duplicated. So I definitely come from a DevOps background. So if it's not in version control and not automated, it ain't real. It doesn't count. It's like the points in whose line is it anyway, right? Anyway. So the next thing is actually a commit build. Then you need to have an artifact repository or registry. Talk about the automated deployment process. Then we have a quality gates. I didn't really put gates there, but automated acceptance tests or whatever you're going to put in there. And then your release into a production environment. Okay? That's, in my mind, a very simple delivery pipeline. Kind of like that. And the reason that we do a delivery pipeline is, I've been doing DevOps training for months now, or almost a year. We want feedback. We always want feedback. And this is kind of why we do microservices. We want the smallest thing that will work so we can get out there, get our feedback. And if it's not right, we want to be able to change it. And as we talked about earlier, be able to either roll back or roll forward to the thing that'll work, right? So that's a simple pipeline, right? We have a test-driven development on your desktop. You do a commit build. Hopefully it passes. If it fails, you go back and fix. If you do your automated tests, they all pass. You move forward. If not, you get feedback to your team, into version control, blah, blah, blah. And then you do deployment and monitoring the deployments. Key to making this whole thing work. And then actually we talked about this earlier on the side was ongoing production monitoring, saying, are we actually getting the services, are we getting the value out of our service that we expect? And so often it'll say monitoring, and you want inherent or assumed in all of this is it's actually also alerting, okay? So you want to actually be told that this thing is good or bad. Let's see how old people are. Does anyone remember NN? NN is no news is good news. All right, so in my mind, what you want is you typically don't want to be alerted when things are going good. You want to be alerted when things are bad, right? So you just want, and if you've ever run a Jenkins, you get the alert emails and you say, great, I don't want to actually know when everything's good. I want to know when I have to take action, when things are bad, okay? And is this a familiar pipeline for most people here? Or is it just like, oh, this is rocket science, right? No. Okay. So to expand, and this is one of the efforts that this same repo I'm going to be adding stuff to is saying, great, we want to actually make a rugged pipeline. And this is not what I have today. What I want to say is to make a rugged pipeline, you want to say, great, I want penetration testing and dynamic testing. And so OWASP Zap would be one of the tools for that. Okay, and so that basically allows you to automate those things. And JMeter is a great tool for performance testing, especially in the Java world. And how many are familiar with Chaos Monkey? The obligatory question, right? And so resilience would be a great place to say, great, how do we actually make sure that we have site reliability aspects? And actually, yeah, getting things working for today was one of those times where I was like, wow, I really need to actually I need to have Chaos Monkey to break things so I can actually see these things. Along with, how many people are familiar with the concept of strong versioning? Okay, yeah. So in my mind, this is key to getting things to a huge communication key to saying, great, I have your major, minor patch, but you need to actually say what is the actual version that we released into production. And a lot of times the pipeline handles most of that, but then there's times, depending upon your environment, that you actually need to know, you need to be able to talk to audit, or you need to talk to whoever it is saying, this is the version that's in production. And typically in logging, you want to actually say, this is the version that we're running, and that's what we're logging. So you want strong versioning, and you want to log that version. Okay? That's not, to my mind, that's not really part of the pipeline, but it's key to actually making the pipeline work. So, so you can track in Subversion. You actually use the word revision, and that'll actually get you the revision number of the commit. And Git, it's typically you're going to use the hash code to say this is the latest, the hash from that commit, that the commit hash. Yeah. Okay. So if you have those things, what I actually typically say is these three numbers are what marketing and management want to see. But from a technical perspective, this is what we care about. All that stuff is very interesting, but we release those things on a regular basis. Okay. Yep. Say again? Resilience. So the idea is, so site reliability, basically, so Chaos Monkey, okay, I actually asked who. Chaos Monkey and Simian Army are Netflix tools. They're open sourced. And what they do, is they take down services. Okay? They'll take down the example. And so the reason that you do this is to say, great, what happens if your service goes down? Which is, typically when we're developing, we're in the happy path. And everything's going great, and everything's going through. And so what this is saying, life happens, and life happens pretty much chaotically. And we need to actually say, great, now you should expect life to happen. Once you've got the happy path happening, you need to now start addressing all of these things are when life happens. Life happens, and someone's attacking your site. Life happens, and you've way too much success, and you need to actually be able to scale and go forward. And life happens, and someone trips over the cord on and that machine goes away. So basically, the resilience is saying the site reliability engineers is the title that usually focuses on this kind of thing, saying how do we actually deal with the fact that machines go down, services die, things don't go the way we expect, and so how does an upstream application deal with the fact that a downstream application disappeared on it? Okay, and so that's what you need to do. You need to be able to. Anyone know other things that are in Simian Army? Yeah, what do you got? Netflix had an outage because AWS what? Say again? Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely scaling to that. If you've actually put something like this in there, that says you actually are aware enough that you're going to do. You can look at your brain goes that side. And I know that Netflix actually has done situations where they've turned off an entire region. So. Okay, so I'm not sure how long ago that was, but I know that Netflix now does game day scenarios where they turn off a region to find out what kind of impact that has. But that's the whole idea behind all of this, is saying you need to be able to say, as a microservices engineer, you need to be able to say, great, what's going to happen? Or how does my application, my service, handle upstream or downstream or the entire region disappearing on me? How do I continue to deliver services? Okay, and so these are two tools that are there's a well-known name, and this is the extended group that says, great, how do we actually create this and simulate an environment where things are falling apart? Well, you're not actually simulating. You're actually put in an environment blowing things up.
Sorry. And where do they really fit in this resiliency part in the pipeline?
So in a pipeline, you're going to actually have a phase where you're going to actually say, great, here's your penetration testing stage. And so you're going to stand up an environment. So this is an interesting thing that I would actually say. When you think about a pipeline's a great image.
Yeah.
I would actually say that I don't like the pipeline as for functionally. It's, you want to say, great, I have my desktop, I have my shared resources, and then I instantiate an environment. And its goal is penetration testing. right? And so I'm going to do that, and then I might do that at the, and then I instantiate another environment that's about performance testing, and I instantiate another one that's about resilience testing. And depending upon budget and things like that, you might, be able to reuse them depending upon what's going on. But then they go away, right? And so they're not really in a pipeline. They may be in your approval gates. These all may go simultaneously because you want that feedback as fast as possible, and so you're going to run them simultaneously, and you don't want them conflicting with each other.
Sure.
Though it might be interesting from a site reliability to say, great, let's try and do penetration testing while performance testing is going on. That would be really. I have not done that, but that's kind of an environment.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I'm forgetting, but isn't there a SLA policy with AWS where you can't install anything for dynamic testing or penetration?
Absolutely,
testing?
that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, good point. I had forgotten about that one. So this is a you want to do this, and if you do this in AWS, your account will get closed down if you don't tell them ahead of time. If you just call them and say, hey, we can't call anybody there. You email them and say, hey, I want to make a request. I want to do this testing. How do I do that? And they'll get back to you with, you can do this, or you can't do this, or you can only do this. But they really typically are saying, this is your attack. If you identify, this is the attacking host, and this is what we're attacking, and they'll give you a time window to do that, so that they can identify that thing. Good point. Any other questions? Nope. But yes, so this is, these aren't in the pipeline. You'll see the pipeline is kind of ragged right now as opposed to rugged. And so I'm using this repository as my effort to create a rugged pipeline. And so over the next week or two, you'll see these things start showing up in the pipeline. Okay? Any other questions about that? All right, thanks for the questions. All right, here's a little more. This is kind of that description I was trying to say. Was saying, great, you have integration, then you have the test environments, and they can come in parallel, or they can come in one way, right? And then you're moving into production. And I assume that this is saying that, great, you have a source build, and there's a concept of fanning out, and it's saying, okay, when a commit happens, I need to build two different components. And the example I'm going to show you in a minute, it actually builds a whole pile of components. I'm not a fan of that, but it's what I had and what I was working with. And so then we move through build, and we do through acceptance, and then we package it up and send it to integration. So that's just an example of a more complicated or a more realistic pipeline in my book. So you're building a whole series of microservices over here, and that's what's required. Say that then you're required those 4 microservices for this package. Then we go through integration, and we actually talk about environment application configuration. We're going to talk about some of that in a bit. Then you have that configuration for those test environments. Then moving off into staging and production. All right. It depends upon how you're delivering it into your environments. In the example we're going to do, I'm just saying we have we're packaging everything at the build time. We're actually registering everything at in Docker Hub. So all of this, I haven't even showed you anything yet, but all of the stuff that I'm showing you is the sources in GitHub, and the Docker registry is in Docker Hub. So you can just pull and run them. And even the build, we'll talk about this in a second, but this build engine, I'm using AWS code commit to do the build, but the build is a Java build, and it packs a Docker image. So I need to actually, I'll jump out to that. Need to actually have Java, Maven, and Docker and Docker. So that's in Docker Hub also. Yes?
Sorry, I missed it. What's orchestrating the pipeline? Sorry.
I'll show you in a second, but it's AWS. It's AWS code pipeline. Okay, any more? Yes?
What's the package step here?
What's the package?
Yes.
Yeah, we just talked about that. It depends. So this is intended to be a great example. In this particular case, this package is actually, I think the way we talk about that, the package is actually the Docker Compose file,
Okay.
right? But what we've also done, another way to look at it is each one of these has been packaged and shipped to Docker Hub.
Okay. Does this mean there is a coupling between the different applications?
Say again?
Are they coupled together, the applications, or can they run independently?
They could run independently, but for this application, for the pet clinic application, we're going to use a compose file to be the deployment vehicle that says, hey, use these four. Actually, I think there are 8 services that we need to actually run this. All right? Okay? All right. Let me show you the pipeline quickly. So the pipeline is incomplete. Let's just be clear about that. So this is it. As it stands right now, I've been working on the deployment process, and the deployment needs I need to do a whole pile of CloudFormation to make the deployment side. But how many people have actually seen the code pipeline stuff before? Okay, a few people. Great. So this basically I'm saying I ask for a code pipeline, and it breaks out and says, great, I want to, where's the source coming from? What's my build phase? I can actually then do a deploy phase, a test phase, and approvals. There's all the standard pieces that you need to do a pipeline. And then how do you actually orchestrate one of these things? We'll dig into this to give an example. The build one is, the source is relatively straightforward. If you're doing a clone from GitHub, the only real challenge in the source code piece is that you need to give a GitHub token to AWS so it has access to it. In this piece, so the build side, we're going to use AWS code build. And what basically does is it builds out a Docker image, and it has and you get charged by the build minute. I think it's half a cent per build minute. Is that right? Something like that. Really, really inexpensive is really the way I'm going to put it. But what we have is, here's my source, right? And here's this image that I'm using as my build image, which is pretty useful, if you can actually see that. Huh? That better? Anyone can see that? In the back, can you see it? One more time. Okay. So it's basically, it's a D&D. What does that stand for? Anyone? Docker and Docker. Excellent. Maven 3, JDK 8. So basically I have those three things in an image, and then I pull my source, right? And it's a Java app with a Maven thing, a Maven build, so POM file. So we'll go scroll down, I'll show you that. And what it does is says, great, I want to have, let's cut over to the source code. Then it has this file, actually I can do it over here. You see that too, or no? That's worse. That was insignificant. Yeah, good enough, or no? I'll talk you through it. And so all this is available for you guys when you are there. We're doing pre-build pieces, build pieces, and post-build pieces. Pre-build, basically, we're going in here and saying, great, I want to start the Docker service. I sleep a little bit because it doesn't actually respond quite fast enough. Then I do a Docker login, and these values are stored in the AWS job. So I'm just passing these values down. So I'm not storing my credentials in GitHub. Kind of handy. All right.
Is this running in the build container, or is this running on the host?
It's in the build container. There is no real host in this scenario. What would a host be?
Like a VM that's running a Docker engine, or is it running?
Yeah, so it's in the It's in the Docker container. Okay. So, like, I don't have any control. Basically, I've requested from Amazon to build something for me, and these are my instructions to it to say this is it. You have to kind of match your container with these instructions. So like if I don't have Docker, it's not going to work so well. Right? Just like down here, if I don't have Maven I don't have JDK, it's not going to work so well. So you have to match those two.
Yeah, maybe you can elaborate later on the Docker and Docker specifics.
The Docker and Docker. Okay, yeah, we can talk about it. Oh yeah. Okay, we'll talk about. I think there's a lot. There's basically a lot of pieces of the puzzle. There are many pieces in the puzzle, and I'm trying to rip through this. So, absolutely ask questions, and thank you for asking us. I'm happy to follow up at any time.
The question, maybe I can Dr. May state is I don't know if this is the same question. The Java, the image that you mentioned in the AWS, is that the image that's running the
Yes.
pipeline?
Okay. So it's not running the pipeline, but it's running the build part of it. Okay. So the pipeline is a AWS service, and one of the things it calls out to is the build service, and this build job is being done within that image in the build service.
And the reason you need Docker in Docker is because that image is Docker, and here you need Docker to build.
Right. So I need to use Docker to actually say, great. In here, I'm actually doing a build Docker image, and then I want to push it. So I want Docker in a Docker. So I have Docker it's in ECS, in the Elastic Container Service, and so I have a container that's running this, and so I need it to have Docker to actually do the build pieces of that, the package pieces, right? Is that making sense? More?
Yeah, no, there's nuances with the
Yeah.
Docker that I've fought with. So
Oh, really? Okay.
Ended up doing it a little bit differently, where we share the Docker socket to the built containers, and they have the Docker CLI, but they're talking to the same engine on the host where the build is running.
You sound like you know more about this than I do.
I was just curious to compare it to yours.
Great. Okay. So that's seem to have a lot more Docker experience in the room than me. So that's logging into Docker so I can publish later on. I'm building. This builds about 8 different services, and then I come down here and push this, and this is actually not working. It's an old enough plugin that it's pointing to Docker IO right now, and so I need to update that plugin.
I have another question.
Yep.
Is the pipeline that you had in AWS, what do you call it, a code
It's
pipeline?
called code. Yeah, all of their little development pieces are called code
something.
pipeline, code build, code commit. They actually have their own
Right.
Git. They have a code deploy.
Is that pipeline itself code, or can it be
So currently
codified?
it's not. It's on my to-do list, and yeah,
It can be coded.
It absolutely
like
can
a
be.
Jenkins multi-branch pipeline. That is-
almost identical. So my intent was to actually say I hadn't done this, so I wanted to do this and get a piece of a pipeline. Pipeline as code is what we're talking about. So I want pipeline as code, and that's basically a piece of cloud formation, just to say this is your code, right? Or this is your pipeline that has here's your source, here's your build, here's your deploy, and any testing along the way or approvals are all within that pipeline. It's not there now. If you're like, hey, that's what I want, ping me, and I'll say, okay, I got it, and once it's published there, I'll.
And can that be checked into the
Yeah.
cluster as well?
And that's the whole idea. That's part of the idea behind here is that we don't want this important information sitting in your repository. You don't want your password, all that stuff. And you can also change which image repo you're logging into. So you can say, great, I'm using the AWS, of course, has an image, a container repository. So you can say, great, we're doing it locally. Or you can just swap out by some configurations of the pipeline, but you're using the same pipeline. That's the intent. I was trying to pull those out. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Okay, so we're logging in. We're building a whole pile of images, and then we start pushing them into Docker Hub specifically. Okay. Any more questions about that? Yeah. So each service is one Docker. Each service is in one Docker image container. No jars. Docker. So the jars are. So you're actually most of this is Spring Boot stuff. So there are jars, but the jars are put into a Docker image. Okay. If you want, I can show you. Does that make sense? Are you familiar with Docker?
Eventually, when you have one jar or you have multiple jars, you have Uber jar or you have different jars. Like say Uber jars.
Right. Yeah. So Spring's using Uber jars or fat jars or whatever. So it's gonna. So the package is one jar that gets put into your Docker image. That, of course, is made up of many jars.
That is published with a microservice, and I think it's supposed to have small jars to depend the life cycle. It's called different places, right? Instead of like fat jars.
That is a discussion, an argument, or a philosophical discussion beyond the scope that I can handle. But yeah, certainly people would agree or disagree. If you have a fat jar, is that micro? Yeah. It's kind of, okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a packaging piece, yeah.
For different programming languages, we do different kind of packaging. So
Right.
whenever we are running the Docker, all we do is Docker run and the image name and blah, blah, blah. So how does the container know that, this is the actual part? Do we specify it in the Docker file, or how does it work?
How do we launch? Basically, how do you launch the Docker? Yeah, so there's a thing called basically saying entry point, and that's how you launch, saying this is what I want to run. This is how I launch the Docker image, the Docker container, is with this entry point piece, which I don't know that I have an example sitting here, but it's in this particular case it's a rather lengthy entry saying I want this and that. I want you to fire up this Java instance with some variables and so forth. And so it's custom depending upon. Yeah, it's custom dependent. You're going to focus on your entry point for how you launch it, but it depends upon your. I'm going to say your software stack and and what I'm going to call later on ecosystem. So what do you call where do you get your configuration from? Where do you go logging? How do you talk to the rest of the world now that you're not a monolith, you're a microservice? Right. So this is one of the things. This particular code base has an old. So no is the answer. But I think I'm going to shift to a point where a plugin that actually leaves a Docker file there, so we can look at it as opposed to it's being generated by a plugin. I'm like, talk about a moxymoron. But anyway, religious argument about generated code and stuff like that. So. Say again? No, it's not even that one. It's a Spotify early version of Docker Maven plugin or something like that.
So
multiple Docker Maven plugins.
Right, so there's Docker file Maven plugin. Yeah, so anyway, yeah. So this, I don't like the way this one works, but this is where I was and how much time I had to, and I'm like, okay, we need to fix it. And it's on my list of to-dos for if anyone wants to help.
So that's the minus P with Docker.
Right. Yeah, so that just builds it, and then I was trying to do the build and push using Maven. Once again, it's got too many things, so I try and separate it out and say, oh, great, I want to publish it that way. All right. Anything else? Great questions, guys. We're covering all of the world of microservices. Okay. Cover most of this. Okay. So what I want to say is that, yes. So I think you were asking about pipeline as code. So this is written. This was created GUI, and the intent is to say, great. Next week I'll have here's a pipeline. You need these variables. Pipeline as code. And you need these variables in your job, and you'll be good to go. Just like the CloudFormation that I need to write to do the deploy into ECS is on the to-do list for like. I have not seen that. Has anyone? I haven't seen that done. Can you export your pipeline into a CloudFormation template? I know that you can. There's a template type thing. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So I know there was a CloudFormer that actually lets you say, look at my infrastructure, I want a CloudFormation. I don't think it actually addresses. I don't think it looks at services. So. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to go down and say, great, I want to stand up a Jenkins server and basically put this exact same thing in a Jenkins file. Because they're very similar. The differences in your pipeline are, okay, what stack am I using and things like that. So if you can start with that, and then they drift for sure, but it's saying, great, here's a starting place, gets a team starting and a project starting much faster than all the knowledge that comes into this. Then you kind of have to catch up to it.
So the other script you were showing us, what was that? The YAML file?
The YAML file so the YAML file basically is this piece. It says I get this image. It's code pipeline, yes. So yeah, it's the thing that wraps around Maven in this particular case. There's.
It's called a build spec file for the code build, not for code pipeline. The YAML file is called a build spec.
Yep.
Specifically for the code build.
Code build, yep. Okay. Any other questions before we saunter on? Okay. So we're going to talk about ecosystem. And I don't know if this, tell me if I'm missing the right word for the foundation, the supporting services that are in microservices land. I'm calling it ecosystem because it seems like an ecosystem that you need to have. I've also seen it called foundation. But what we're saying in this example, we have, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? 5 different services that are required to actually stand up. And this is minimal. We actually have another slide that's basically saying, here's what a real full-blown environment looks like. Right? So we need to have discovery services. We're using Eureka here. I don't know how my coloring got so exciting on there. Right? So you need to be able to locate services. Once you have microservice up, you need to be able to locate it, and you need to be able to route traffic back through it. to it, right? Then you actually want to, any good application needs to actually have its configuration externalized. I think it was a 12 factor says put it in the environment. So this is our environment variable. So this is your Java properties file or whatever. So the API gateway is Zool. This allows for some of the routing and monitoring, some of the security and resilience. And we actually have an admin thing, which is the Spring Boot admin side of things. Those two kind of have some overlap. And then I haven't actually used Zipkin much at all, but it's in here. It's basically some tracing, which is quite important when you're working in microservices and have many, many different services.
What kind of monitoring we are talking about here?
What kind of monitoring?
Yeah.
Right.
What are metrics?
I'm gonna show you some of these things, but that's I wouldn't. Let's see. They're monitoring. The way I would describe it is they're monitoring for humans, as opposed to if I want to monitor something as a service, I want to know whether it's up or down, or if it's performing as expected. That's not the tool I'm going to use for that, actually. There are two other ones that I'm going to recommend down there. Elk is one, and then Sysdig. How many people have actually used Sysdig? Yeah? Love to hear your thoughts on that, Lara. But Sysdig actually is great. It has monitoring and alerting at the container level, so you can actually say, great, I can get the metrics I need out of most of the stack within the system. So that's really helpful. But so we need, my point here is that we say we need an ecosystem. We need to be able to discover our service. We need to be able to load balance. We need to send traffic to it. We need to route it. We need to actually say, great, where's our configuration? So where, all the database is actually internal in this case. But if we say, great, we want to actually have a MySQL database or whatever as my database store, I store that in there. So we need this 5 different services just to support. We actually have 3 services that we're supporting. So we have more supporting services at this point than the actual services. So those who are actually doing microservices, is that, have you been able to get away with 5 supporting services or ecosystem? White box metrics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Include part of the code. So whatever metrics we want to capture.
Uh-huh.
So that is another tool is most of them is using Prometheus.
Promote this? Okay. That's great. I've never heard of that one before. Okay. All right. I don't have answers to lots of these questions. Some of this came from the Spring Cloud collection of things, saying we need to have circuit breakers. You guys are familiar with circuit breakers? So if you're not familiar, circuit breakers are one of those things I dig. Circuit breakers are in line with the Chaos Monkey and Simian Army, basically saying this service is down. If you directly call that service, you're hanging, waiting for that to come back. So a circuit breaker is saying, great, sometimes I get this wrong, I sit there and have a relationship with that, and to actually get to that service, you come to me and I tell you whether or not it's up. And so if it's failing, I send a message back saying, hey, I'm not available right now. And so it basically shorts out. Does anyone have a better description of how that works? But that's the idea, is that basically saying it's part of resilience, saying the service is down or I'm not responding properly. But as opposed to, as a calling service, I go, hey, but what do I do now? It goes, oh, I'm going to tell you that it's not up. And you then have to deal with the fact that it's not up, because that's part of life.
You might see other implementations that are where multiple things that do the same
Yeah, so that says, yeah, if you had a relationship with a particular instance, nope, I want to go to the next one. So it's kind of a load balance. You can there are different scenarios, different patterns for that. Is that what you're talking about, kind of? Is that what you're talking about, kind of we kind of load balance and shift over? So if you have a session open,
yeah. Yes, exactly.
Right.
You could even do a circuit breaker based on you're seeing much higher level of errors on this surface than this surface, and that circuit breaker will trip,
right,
and everything will fail to the other surface. It can be based on any metric.
Right. So yeah, so the circuit breaker can be configured in whatever you as a developer know. And that kind of speaks to this is contracts. So saying, okay, you set up a set of contracts saying this is more, I think of it more in development time is you want to actually have a set of contracts saying if you're consuming my services, what's the contract you have with me? And so I want to make sure that they run before I release it out the pipeline. And if the contract we have doesn't, it fails, then my code fails. And it may then require that we, hey, I got a question. You need such and such. Can we negotiate that and move on? But that's a social aspect as opposed to a technical aspect. But it has as opposed to you finding out that I've changed the interface in production or some other environment. I find out right away and go, oh, somebody wants this way to work this way. Do I need to change that contract? Or iterate that the contract, or can we negotiate that? So it's early interfacing with people. But anyway, so this is a list of different things. Security being hugely important. You'll see that in most things that I do. Say, hey, when you talk about the security side of things. So on monitoring side of say elk and sysdig, and you were saying, what was that? Promote this is another one, okay? Prometheus, oh. I heard promote that. Prometheus, oh, okay. Great. Yeah, and so there's different things we talked about some load balancing.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you using Netflix's library for circuit breaker or something else?
So we're not actually using circuit breaker at all.
Okay.
But my reference is definitely to Netflix's Hystrix.
Hystrix.
Yeah, that's the one I know the best. I don't even know that too many other examples other than that.
Okay.
I assume that there are other environments that support other things like that. Are you familiar with others?
I don't know if Finagle from Twitter supports it for Scala. Maybe I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it might. I'm not sure if it supports that feature.
Let's go, say the
Finagle.
Finagle.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're using Scala, right?
Scala.
So that would end up using that. Yeah.
Not a Scala guy, but
Okay.
I'm not the only person in the room either, so that's fine. Okay. Yeah. Most of the stuff is so most of Spring Boot is jumping out of Netflix. Or I don't know if it's most at this point, but their Spring Cloud, I guess, is really kind of their Netflix world.
So, back when somewhere you had property server, are you using
configuration server?
Yeah, are you using Spring Boot config server for properties for different environments?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes life. Once you know you have to do that, it makes life easier. So, okay, here it is. And most frequently, the back end on earlier environments is actually sitting in Git, so you can just kind of. Okay. I think this is one of those things that we say, great. How do we actually create this? There's sets of ecosystems that have these different services. How do we have those available, or kind of spin up your knowledge in the Netflix ecosystem or in the HashiCorp ecosystem? I don't know if that's a real term, or whatever the other ecosystem, so that you can say, great, this is. So it's not like I'm a microservices person. I'm a microservices Netflix or Spring person, because that's it's helpful. Otherwise you can be talking, is this Hystrix or is this Fraggle Rock? Something like that. I think that's one of the things we kind of have to move toward. So here's more. Can you even read any of that? Oh, sorry guys. All right, well you'll have the slides. But basically saying here's some really core ones. Here's config, here's policy, security, here's some data, and here you have a testing service and a monitoring service and an event service. Let's see, a caching service, a configuration management service. That sounds like that. Location service, a business cool service. I don't know what that is. I can't even read it here. A persistent service. Image repository. So basically, what is the ecosystem and what is the foundation upon which you actually need to be working in? And like one of the things about Netflix, they talk about is saying, great, we open source most of our stuff, and so if you're running a streaming video operation, you might be able to use most of it, and who knows, maybe HBO does. But that's the ecosystem that they need. Now there's certain things that are just common for everybody, but key management and policy management, there's a whole variety of these things. And so my point is trying to say this is something to be aware of. It's as important, if not more important, than the pipeline. You need to have the pipeline delivering code fast so you can actually pivot and change and update things fast. But you need to be able to say, great, as a team member, I want, if I want to find a new, what was I saying? New coworker, I'd like my new coworker to be fluent in Netflix, ecosystem, or Fraggle, some other one, some other defined ecosystem, or we've built our own, and so you need to come and learn what that is. So. Okay, so amazingly, all that discussion talks about actually delivering these 3 services. We have a customer service, we have a visit service, and we have a vet service for our pet clinic. So I was hoping this would be a more dramatic thing because, there's 5 these services that support these 3, but I blew that in the earlier slide. So. And let me see if it's actually up, and we'll show you or am I getting wiped out from the portal login? It's kind of weird. Yes! Very exciting. It's up. Actually, I'm going to escape for a second and show you a couple of things. We're talking about what are we monitoring and what do we get. So here's Eureka. And I'm not sure how fresh this is, so I'm going to show it to you right now. We have the admin service, we have the API gateway, we have a customer service, we have tracing, and we have vet service. So we're kind of missing a couple services going on there, but one of them is Eureka, right? And that's a discovery service, right? Let's give me a nice big warning saying, hey, you ran out of your leases. Okay, so that's what Eureka looks like. I just wanted you to get a view of that. Got to always show the page that's dead.
Did you put Eureka as one of your 8 microservices, or did you
Yeah.
get an image with Eureka?
It's one of my 8 microservices. Yeah, so that was one of the things I discovered a couple days ago with, I don't know how thin each one of these is. And ECS requires a memory configuration for each thing. And so you need to actually say, okay, now you need to size, so I need to size each one. So I'm like, 128 meg, I hope. And I believe most of them came up. Anyway, so it's one of those things where you're like, okay, it's knowing each one of these services. So there's the care and feeding, it's, the who is the shepherd of that service. And do they then set the configuration of that? And so this is Zipkin, which I've never used before. It's up and working, yay! Unlike other ones.
What's that tracing? Any idea? Is that more like the silver bullet going across all your microservices?
That's what I would assume you want to be using it for. I have not been using it, so I don't know. I've been fighting my way through a whole series of things.
Since earlier, if it is monolithic, so we don't need.
You don't need to.
logs, whereas now calls itself is RPC, different services. So what time it reached, and what time it exited from that particular service. So it adds the salt and as well as gives you the that tracing.
So it's one of those things that you didn't need before, but in microservices land you need, because you need to be able to say, okay, what is this? And I've never actually gotten this application to show me a whole lot of valuable information, to tell you the truth. What I have is it's up and working. So not a terribly exciting demo on that side. And I forgot what I blew up here. But this is part of the situation where I'm like, hey, this is where I need my resilient, I need to be able to say, if this falls down, how do I get it back up, kind of thing. And that's the resilient side of things, which I haven't gotten to on this. So
Does this application use a database?
it does. So you can actually outsource. It's using in-memory database, or you can easily put a configuration in saying, here's my MySQL database, stand up on MySQL, add that to the compose file, and store it out there.
Running outside of the container, I guess?
So to make it simple, they did it in memory, so it's inside. So yeah, but it's a simple configuration change to get it outside. Okay. All right. So I would actually need, the question is, what's our next microservice to add into that? But I think to my mind, my focus is actually not to be on the microservices to add things. I want to actually say, here's your pipeline in place, and here's the services, the foundation services that support these things better, from better logging and monitoring and alerting to the circuit breaker pieces, more resilience, and so forth. Those are the things that I'm more focused on chasing. We've been having a discussion, but there's plenty of discussion to be had. I have no idea what kind of time we are. Oh. Well, we'll totally trashed the schedule then, right?
We always go over, so.
Okay, well great.
Well, maybe we should say, if anybody has a hard stop and needs to leave, we won't be offended. And then who wants to stay for discussion? Well,
yeah. Yes.
So, what stage of adoption of all this stuff is Concur at today?
Chris? Stage of adoption is
All the supporting platform components of microservices. Yeah, overall. Concur.
And from my team. We have a lot of infrastructure built up. So all the supporting microservices, you mentioned the infrastructure to enable teams to run with microservices. We have them. Whatever is missing, because of the end-to-end DevOps kind of approach, you build what is missing, so you can own it. So, for example, the monitoring services. We have monitoring services which are standardized, and you can use them. You are always welcome to use your own solution. So that's, if you think about the previous slide, really.
That one?
No, the previous one.
The sane one, huh?
Yes. Yeah. So, for example, API gateway, yes, we have it. Configuration, discovery, we have at different stages. Does it mean that you have to use them? You might not.
Okay.
So,
need some level of standardization for service discovery, for example.
for service discovery, it is definitely helpful. It's definitely helpful because it simplifies how you are deploying microservices. You can potentially go without it, but then you need to make sure that everybody's aware of everybody else. So it makes the deployment and maintenance model much harder to implement. I'm just saying that they are very useful, but you can start without them. If you want to start with microservices, you can start without having everything set already. And that's how we started. Like when we started slowly, and some teams just started building the components. And some of these components became a standard. For example, monitoring. If one team came up with monitoring solution, other teams adapted. Finally, right now we have a team which owns the logging or monitoring microservice.
Right. I mean, so especially the discovery services, if you don't do that, I mean, if you configure everything, if you hard code everything into a configuration service as opposed to using discovery service, then it's very difficult when a service goes down, which the service always goes down. So that's where, yeah, I mean, you can technically get around it, but you're also known as running, almost running a monolith. But a monolithic configuration file.
Yeah, if you go without some of them, and if you unleash the chaos monkey,
So for discovery, I come to use a lot of microservices, right? For discovery, we found out it's something easier. You have endpoint, like for example, you have ELB in AWS, right? So you have your service coming up, you just register to the ELB. So everybody just talking to this ELB. Or you have a DNS in Route 53, for example. Then you have this DNS always like configured. So everybody just looking to this DNS, find the domain name. But behind the scene, your service can up and down, right? That's actually easier. Instead of you query a registry and get the service back and then try to do like talking to a service. So you kind of get.
So it's almost using DNS as a lightweight service.
So you're always talking to one endpoint. If you look at AWS, actually they always give you an endpoint, right? So you're talking to one endpoint, but behind the scenes, they have a fleet of a service.
Right, load
A lot of
balancer.
service working on.
Great.
That's actually a very good point because you want as much of your environment to be as fluid and dynamic as possible, so that you have these services you could depend on. So it's, for instance, some environments use SkyDNS as a lightweight DNS server that's looking at etcd. It's being updated by Kubernetes and service abstractions and route abstractions. It allows one to use a simple name for a project or for a pod service within a project. Everything is abstracted to the point where you just look up a name.
Yeah. What else we got? Yep.
So, do you have any recommendations for logging between services? Like, so you have this, or is that covered by Zipkin? Like, so you have this. So I have my this request which comes in and touches like 5 or 6 microservices, right? And maybe some service down the line through an error. So I want to just see the trace that like through the ecosystem, which what the real root cause was. So instead of checking like 5 or 6 log files or server logs to see what actually like can I consolidate the logs somewhere?
Right. So you want to so the model or the example I can think of is saying, great, I've logged everything in Elk. So Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, and then I do a search on that transaction. As long as you actually have a transaction that goes through all the services, then you can search on that transaction. So there's basically best behavior for logging in a microservices world is a little more disciplined than logging elsewhere. One of which is you need to have a transaction, and you need to centrally log, and then and that's really one of the situations where you say, great, this is a scenario. What's the query, and in Elk or whatever your logging tool is, to pull that data out. I haven't used Zipkin, so I don't have an answer for you. I mean, it clearly, it's one of the things I'm going to explore because we have a whole service all about tracing. So.
If you want to stay under log, Elk is a better option. Okay.
Yeah, I would assume that the Elk then you have the context. So they're actually, I'm not sure where I've seen this, but I can share their kind of here's best practices for logging within microservices, which has a series of things. So yeah, that's a great question. Dave.
So microservices in the cloud, you mentioned this in I guess
Other small groups, but not having a single kind of source for failure is an idea of microservices, but then we deploy to just AWS, and if AWS goes down, I'm just wondering if anyone has kind of given thought to how to do a multi-cloud deployment, like Netflix and Google have, released Spinnaker, so you can deploy multi-cloud. You can kind of fail over, say, assume no points of failure. AWS goes down, you fail over to Google. And granted, that's probably pretty difficult to do. I'm just wondering if anyone has an experience actually deploying to multiple clouds with one service.
In the back there.
So if I understand your question correctly, you are asking about failover from one cloud to the another cloud. So what I've seen typically is that you're actually not failing over from one cloud to another cloud. What AWS will do for you is that you can, for your disaster recovery and for fault tolerance, you can deploy in multiple regions. The chances of multiple regions going down are significantly lower than one region going down. Availability zones within one region can still be down because if the region is down, then all your AZs are down. But you could deploy to US East and US West, for instance. And then through DNS resolution, you can quickly switch your production applications to point to a different disaster recovery zone. So it does increase your cloud footprint. The challenge with actually doing more than one cloud provider is that unless you are using something like OpenStack, the cost and effort to actually create your environment for one environment to another provider is actually double essentially. There is no common API that anybody uses, and there is not going to be one. AWS is not going to conform to OpenStack. They are the leader. So,
yep.
One of our customers, in order to not get tied into a vendor through buffering themselves from the cloud provider using Kubernetes. So we're actually deploying Kubernetes on AWS.
Tomorrow you can decide to go.
We can go to Google if you want to.
That would shape kind of how you protect your applications.
Everything's going to be built in, it's targeted to run Dockers inside Kubernetes. And so that way we can also run on-prem on VMware as well.
One more thing, like majority of the services and microservices, if you have more than 100 or something, like maintenance in this architecture is difficult compared to Kubernetes. Kubernetes where you can pretty much provide built-in support, discovery, environment configuration and all those things, auto scalability, A/B testing and all those things. So that is another issue. So I saw some places.
Ingress for API gateway.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Either OpenShift or Kubernetes provides majority of the services.
Yep, that'd be great. So I'm happy to know that Mesosphere will do multi-cloud and on-prem. So you could, so that's a possibility. Oh, we got a question up here? Yeah.
Monitoring within the, monitoring the microservices with the health. So did you mean the Spring Boot actuators?
Say again?
Did you mean the Spring Boot actuators when you said about the health to monitor within the microservices?
No, I was just saying what are the are they behaving? trying not to actually be too Spring focused. So saying how do you monitor and alert on those microservices? So is it up? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? I like to look at the metrics and say, what are they? Is the value we're expecting from this service being delivered or not? And if it's not, then that's alerting. So it's not. I don't know if Spring Boot actuators.
The actuator is a fairly new thing, and I think it's probably. I haven't looked into it deeply, but it might be a good area here.
They are actually, like if you don't want to do all those health and ping overrides like in your microservices or the API that you're actually writing. So basically you got to have some kind of health check implemented as part of your mic. With the Spring Boot actuators, it's a very opinionated approach. So they actually come with those predefined, and they're going to basically, as you know, Spring Boot, it's all auto-configurable,
right,
and all class path scanning. So all those health, ping, and I believe in the browse, those are basically all, you can even disable the security on all those health endpoints and have them publicly accessible. You are basically not writing any code for that. Yeah, and they're purely like more on like ping-based health checks. Yeah, they don't have any business logic. Like you can't really go through the business logic on that. It's just basically tells you if the service is up and running. Yeah, all the HTTP status code base.
Do they provide any tracing capability between?
No, they don't have. That's why I actually noted down that Zipkin, because that's something that we don't have, and I would be interested, like him, just to know like what it does.
Let's figure it out, man.
We have 1,600 of those APIs and microservices.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, SimKit sounds like it might be useful there. Cool. All right. What else we got? Yeah, please.
Didn't cover much about life cycle of base images in the DevOps kind of, not the pipeline per se. Those are activities before the pipeline, I guess.
Yeah.
Any suggestions or any discussions there for your base image management or life cycle?
For the life cycle of base.
Creating it,
Scan it forever. Make sure it does not no security vulnerabilities.
Registry and all that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't have recommendations specific to that. Other than keep security scans on it and make sure that they're what you want. I'm always of the mind to say, great, I want the least in my container image that I can get, so that I'm not scanning a whole pile and don't find exciting new things when I'm, whether it's the build image or the actual base image for other things.
Along the same lines, have you used in the past any scanning of your like some repositories like Nexus or Artifactory for security, like using maybe JFrog, X-Ray, or something like that? Have you use anything like that?
For the Docker images?
No,
for the
artifacts.
The dependencies. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not a fan of the. So not to say I don't think that's a great way to do it, I guess. And I like to, and what will be added to this, in a couple weeks, is there's actually a plugin from OWASP again that does a dependency check, and it goes and looks at MITRE's database of CVEs and says which ones are there. And and I'm always amazed when I run the thing. I'm like, what? It was like the Selenium libraries I was using actually used something that was vulnerable. I was like, yeah, it's in my test suite, so I'm not that concerned about it. But I was like, yeah. So I highly recommend using that as a security scan. It's called dependency check or something like that. Look at OWASP is a great resource for anything security on the web. And so I like their OWASP Zap, and yes, let AWS know that you're scanning something. But that's the solution I like, because it's not dependent on somebody's server, and it's a lot more portable.
Is that automated in the pipeline, or is that something you run outside on your own?
No, yeah, it would be a Maven task. So in this example, I would have in the Maven task, I would have that little plugin. It would pull it down, and it takes some time. So I would only do it daily because it has to update the library each time. So it goes out to MITRE, pulls down the library, the database of the CVEs, and scans everything. Yeah. OWASP dependency check. Dependency check is yeah. So that's yeah. And if I got it wrong, email me or ping me and say, hey, you got that wrong, because it's in Evernote somewhere or it's a bookmark somewhere.
We would love to do that as part of the build process. If there is
This kind of, we have those scanners like security scans. They do happen at the artifacts that we have published to the artifactory, but they're more like after the fact.
Do you check anything that's coming from the internet, like the open source jars?
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Not just the stuff you're.
No, they're basically on the pull.
The proxy.
Yeah. So, but the problem that we are facing is like get hit with those after we have pushed something, because our clients won't be able to pull them.
Yeah, you want to shift as left as possible.
Exactly. So it's basically if there's something that we could actually do on the side of push.
Yeah.
And if there's a Maven plugin for that, we would love that.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep. Thanks.
So there's also another concern around that whole area of saying, great, you've used this library and it's well maintained, or it doesn't have any vulnerabilities. I've been in environments where they say, look, we only want to use things that have n number of maintainers and have so much activity and n number of no more than 10 open issues and things like that. And so there's actually services out there that will actually track that stuff. So you're like, okay, well, we don't have a vulnerability, but we have n number of open issues. So it's not actually being maintained. So it's not a maintained artifact. And so that's a whole different, from the life cycle of something. You're like, okay, so if you want to take it to the next level. But I think the dependency check thing is a great thing to bring it onto your desktop on the left. If if your team knows that you add a new thing, run this one command, you're good to go. You run it every night on a nightly build, and then you get that feedback. Then it's only if it's only a day when the build happens, you're like, okay, I know what I was talking about. This is a new jar. We need to find the right jar or define it, whatever it is. So, what else we got? Yep.
You mentioned blue-green deployments in the beginning. Any recommendations on what tools to use, or are you like doing that custom with some APIs you've written?
That's kind of part of the. It depends upon what environment you're working in, really. I don't know. Does OpenShift actually support a blue-green? Is there? And it's an easy way to do that.
We've got blue-green, blue-violet.
Canary in a coal mine deploys. So I don't have a particular. If you're an OpenShift, that's certainly it's a no-brainer. And Amazon, they certainly different things like you can do that easily also. So it's a matter of saying what are the constraints, where are you, and so forth. So it's not that I put it down there saying, and I was going to throw Canary and other things, and I was like, okay, we're going to have this huge conversation about that, and I was like, we only have
right.
Technically, we only had 40 minutes, and I blew that. So, we can have. I'm happy to have the conversation, but it's kind of one of those things. Which environment do you have?
Sure.
Which constraint? Usually, what happens, it boils down to what constraint are you kind of working around? Is it a technical constraint, or is it an organizational constraint, or is it what is it? The organizational constraints are way harder than the technical constraints.
In AWS, we found that the whole ALB
Sort of, and with the ALB having the
drain them.
Percentage base, like drain one out and bring up, but do it like phase it out in like percentage basis.
Yeah.
So keep on moving, like adding more resources on the green or whatever you call it, A and B basically.
Right.
Bring one down, and by the end of like your testing, you have the B up and running 100%. So, and the C names and everything, they are pretty much like completely agnostic of what's behind the LB. So I think in AWS makes it much more easier.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, the solution is just different between OpenShift and AWS. I assume I haven't played much with Azure, but I assume it has similar things. They're running hard to keep pace. Dave?
Are you typically running or typically seeing people spin up like Spring Boot or do the whole Docker compose and spin that up just like it would be in the devs at, test environments?
So it depends on the environment that we're talking about, but I typically see people just do Spring Boot, and then as they mature, as the development organization matures, they bring in Docker and Docker Compose and things, and then they say, great, don't. It depends upon the organization again. Right. You can't do that on your machine, so you have to do it in the cloud. Right. So you can do the same thing, but you're shipping, your Docker machine is in the cloud, so you're good to go, assuming that you can install Docker machine. This is once again, this is the organizational constraints are much more challenging than the technical constraints. So it's we can do backflips with technology to work with whatever the organizational constraints are. So.
Just one comment on this. It's actually challenging for us because we have so many services, right? Sometimes it's really hard to test on locally. So for example, if you work from home, you don't have a VPN, and you depend upon some other microservice running some other places. So that pipeline comes like really handy and important. So you can quickly deploy to your testing environment, then integrate with other services. So basically, it's runtime dependency instead of a binary dependency, which means you cannot run all the service on locally, which sometimes is not possible.
You can do tests and mocks and stuff.
Yeah, then you need a test environment. Yeah, so just doing locally really is a challenge for us. Yeah.
Cool. Yep.
I just want to say to the gentleman in the earlier question, down here about our company, Define Technologies, sponsors JHipster, an open source app generator. And one of the benefits of that is that it's open source project, and it's a full feature microservice app generator using Spring Boot, Angular 4, a bunch of the Netflix technologies for the gateways. So if you ever were curious about how a best practice application was done, feel free to check out JHipster. You can build the apps on your own and look at the source code to see how it's done. It's just a basic example using maybe a very small domain model like automobiles, cars, and insurance. I don't know, something like that. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me afterwards.
So if I want to pivot and get out of pet clinic and go to stock trading, I could use JHipster to write my code.
One of the cool things is that it's got an easy way to make domain model objects too. There's something called JDL, which is it's not a proprietary, it's a custom data modeling language, and there's a tool called JDL Studio, which lets you, using something like JSON, develop a data model, and you can actually see kind of like a miniature ERD diagram, and import that into JHipster, and it'll automatically create your domain objects. It'll create your REST endpoints. It'll create microservices for you for each one of those domain objects, and it'll integrate it all into your gateway application. And if you use the JHipster registry, it will all automatically, I believe Eureka, it'll register through the correct ports into your JHipster registry, and also the gateway will also register that, see your microservices, and be able to communicate with them out of the box. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to respond about the local environment. This is a kind of a philosophical discussion we're having within our team for our customer. Is my belief is that the developer should have the ability to run in a container locally, and for our Kubernetes environment, I'm prototype using Fabricate and Minikube to be able to run our at this point, they're not microservices. They're kind of monoliths being ported into Docker, but in the future, hopefully, we'll break it up into microservices and run it inside of Minikube. deploy it and run it inside Minikube. My prototype is actually doing microservices as a small Spring Cloud application. Doesn't do really much, but it has 5 microservices, 5 different jars. One of them is actually Eureka, which I'm probably not going to need because of built-in discovery mechanism in Eureka in Kubernetes. But Minikube is an example. You can run it on just about any platform. I'm running it in Windows 10 on using it, backed by Hyper-V.
You have to be able to install stuff, right?
So Fabricate in Maven builds, and you can give it which image to use for the Docker. It creates the Docker image, deploys your app in it, and deploys it into Minikube locally.
Okay. So I've recently been in an environment where you weren't able to install Docker or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. I have Androids.
Right. So this is that's the environment where I was like, okay, well, Spring is about all I got, so that's what I'm going to be using. And so that was the standard for that environment. I was like, okay, that's got people trying to do microservices, and you got them hopping, So all right, anything else? We're at 8 o'clock. It's time for whatever's next.
So everybody's talking about like Docker containers. I'm just wondering, anybody is running anything on like AWS Lambda or Azure like functions as microservices? Okay.
I'm not
Just
really
one?
sure I would talk about Lambda as being a microservice. I mean, certainly it's got. Yeah, it's got event-based triggering, but it doesn't really run as a service. It doesn't own.
No, if you look at the reference architecture, actually, it's still like it's microservices. It's really micro. You just have a function as a microservice. Right. Then you pair it with the API gateway and like DynamoDB. You run it's like completely like a serverless kind of architecture. So it's really popular in the mobile world because most mobile developers, they don't care about like backend. They don't want to maintain servers and databases, right? So they just want something up running for their backend. So their backend is microservice based upon serverless. So it's like new trending in the mobile world. So yeah.
The most use cases I've seen for lambdas and functions have been in actually DevOps and infrastructure management. Yes. I haven't seen that many use cases in business logic running in lambdas personally, but I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, I watched a video about from Anime. They're running lambda using like a MapReduce, sort of like a batch job kind of thing, doing their data analytics, basically scan their mortgages kind of thing. So there's some use case over there. So
I think I saw a project NASA is doing where they're like encoding all their video images and video files and images. Yeah, right. Using Lambda.
Example, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, the anime use case is really interesting. They're doing lots of major
How is that a microservice?
scanning and validation.
Lambda.
How's the Lambda microservice?
Was
It's doing a function, transforming some data for you. You get the data, and the code is gone. How is that a microservice? It's sort of a system.
It's a stateless service, right? Think about you call it, we invoke, get an event, then it processes for you, then just do something. That is in the database or just return result for you. So it's really microservice.
or a nano service maybe? I don't know.
Listen, Chris just pointed out something. The air conditioning just went on.
Our time is up.
So what I'm going to say is, first I'm going to wrap it up. If you guys, whoever wants to stay, you can stay. Number one, thank you, Phil. Great job.
Thank you, guys.
Number two, thank you to Chris and Concur for the space. We appreciate it. Thank you. 3, Lacey and SG2 for the pizza and the beer and the drinks, and thank you very much. And finally, to my old friend Paul Brigner and his son Brandon, videographer extraordinaire, for the help with that. So thanks very much. So we don't have a meeting in August. It looks like we might have a meeting the third week in September 21st. We'll be kind of announcing that. I'm working on that now. We're working on that now. I would say one thing. We've been getting this sort of consistent message, hey, really kind of hands-on things are great. Tell us how to do it, what you learned, lessons learned, what worked, what didn't. And today's talk was one in that direction. If there are specific things that you want to see, please just go to the meetup site, message us. We can sort of digest it and hopefully kind of orient the talks to kind of hands-on
lessons learned, what works, what doesn't. I'll just say one last thing. It seems like kind of people fall into one of three groups. We are not doing microservice, but we're thinking about it. How do we get started? Like, how do we think about bounded contexts, and how do we start with a monolith, and what do we do first, and so forth. Second stage is we have a small number, but we haven't thought about infrastructure. We haven't thought about ecosystems. Now it's raising its head. It's getting more complex. What do we do about the environment and setting that up? And then third is really, we're running, maybe many dozens or even hundreds or potentially thousands of different instances. We need production-ready checklists. We need to think about sort of different topics, kind of downstream a little bit. If there's any one of those that's of interest from a hands-on perspective, again, just send a note, let us know, and we'll try to orient talks. We're talking to some folks who are from not the DC area when they're in town, who are doing some pretty significant microservice, production environments, and they can talk as well. So I'll leave you with that.